Everything changed in a matter of seconds. What began as another night inside a troubled marriage suddenly became one of the most shocking criminal cases in modern American history, a case that would dominate television screens, newspaper headlines, courtroom discussions, and public debate for years to come. More than 3 decades later, the name Lorena Bobbitt still sparks immediate recognition around the world. Yet behind the sensational headlines and endless jokes was a deeply complicated story involving allegations of domestic abuse, questions about power and control, immigration struggles, trauma, marriage, and survival. Before we continue, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell so you can get first-hand updates on this story and many others as new developments and discussions emerge. To understand how this case unfolded, it is important to begin long before the events that made international news in June 1993. Lorena Gallo came to the United States with hopes shared by many immigrants who leave their home countries in search of greater opportunity. Born and raised in Ecuador and later spending part of her youth in Venezuela, she dreamed of building a stable future. Like countless newcomers arriving in America, she believed hard work and determination could help create a better life. She hoped to find security, meaningful relationships, and a chance to pursue the American dream. The transition was not always easy. Immigrants often face language barriers, financial uncertainty, cultural adjustments, and the challenge of establishing themselves in an unfamiliar environment. Despite these obstacles, Lorena worked to build a life for herself and adapt to her new surroundings. Friends and acquaintances later described her as ambitious and hopeful, someone who wanted stability and a sense of belonging. It was during this period that she met John Bobbitt, a former United States Marine. Their relationship developed quickly. Like many young couples caught up in the excitement of a new romance, they experienced an intense connection that seemed promising at first. Their courtship moved rapidly, and before long they decided to marry. From the outside, the marriage appeared to reflect the traditional picture of a young couple beginning a life together. But according to Lorena, serious problems emerged early in the relationship. Over time, she alleged that the marriage became marked by emotional abuse, intimidation, coercion, and physical violence. She later described a household where fear increasingly replaced affection and where conflict became a regular part of daily life. One aspect of Lorena's allegations that attracted significant attention involved her immigration status. She claimed that concerns related to residency and her position as an immigrant were sometimes used as a means of control. Advocates who later discussed the case pointed to this issue as an example of how immigration status can create vulnerability within abusive relationships. When one partner fears deportation, legal uncertainty, or loss of stability, that fear can become a powerful source of pressure. Throughout the marriage, law enforcement reportedly responded to multiple domestic disturbance calls involving the couple. While not every call resulted in criminal charges, the repeated involvement of police painted a picture of an increasingly troubled relationship. Neighbors and observers became aware that serious tensions existed behind closed doors. At the same time, financial pressures added another layer of strain. After John left military service, the couple faced economic difficulties. Money problems can place stress on any relationship, and in this case, financial instability appears to have intensified existing conflicts. Bills, employment concerns, and uncertainty about the future contributed to an already volatile environment. As the months passed, the marriage continued to deteriorate. Each side would eventually present sharply different accounts of what was happening inside the home. John denied many of Lorena's allegations and disputed her descriptions of abuse. Lorena maintained that she had endured years of mistreatment and lived under constant emotional strain. The disagreement between those competing narratives would later become one of the most significant aspects of the legal battles that followed. Everything reached a breaking point during the early morning hours of June 23, 1993. According to Lorena's account, a disputed encounter occurred after John returned home. She alleged that he sexually assaulted her while she slept. John strongly denied that accusation. What happened during those hours became a central point of controversy and debate, with both sides offering dramatically different versions of events. After the encounter, Lorena left the bedroom and entered the kitchen. What happened next would become one of the most widely reported criminal acts in modern American history. She picked up a knife and returned to the bedroom. While John slept, she severed his penis. In a state that she later described as extreme emotional distress and psychological turmoil, she then left the residence and drove away. At some point during her drive, she threw the severed organ into a field. The shocking nature of the incident immediately captured public attention. Emergency responders were called, and a frantic effort began to locate the missing organ. Authorities eventually found it after a search of the area. John was rushed to a hospital where surgeons undertook an extraordinarily complex emergency procedure. Working for hours under intense pressure, medical specialists successfully reattached the organ. The operation was considered a remarkable surgical achievement, and John ultimately recovered significant physical function. Had the story ended there, it likely would still have generated widespread attention. Instead, the case exploded into a global media phenomenon unlike almost anything seen before.
Television networks competed for coverage. Tabloids splashed the story across their front pages. Late-night comedians incorporated the case into their monologues. Talk shows devoted endless hours to discussing every detail. News organizations from around the world descended upon the small Virginia community where the events had occurred. As coverage intensified, the complexity of the underlying issues often became overshadowed by sensationalism. Much of the media focus centered on the shocking physical act itself. The story became a punchline in popular culture. Jokes circulated widely, and many discussions reduced the case to a spectacle. Yet beneath the humor and sensational headlines were serious questions involving domestic violence, marital relationships, trauma, mental health, and criminal responsibility. The legal proceedings that followed reflected these deeper issues. John Bobbitt stood trial on charges related to Lorena's allegations of sexual assault. During those proceedings, jurors heard conflicting testimony regarding the nature of the marriage and the events that occurred before the incident. Ultimately, John was acquitted. Lorena then faced her own criminal trial for malicious wounding. Her defense team argued that years of alleged abuse had contributed to a psychological state that impaired her judgment during the incident. Expert witnesses discussed trauma, emotional distress, and mental health factors that they believed influenced her actions. After hearing the evidence, the jury reached an unusual conclusion. Lorena was found not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. The verdict meant that jurors believed she had committed the act but lacked the mental responsibility required for criminal conviction at that moment. Following the verdict, she spent time receiving psychiatric evaluation and treatment before eventually being released. The differing outcomes of the two trials generated intense public discussion. Supporters of John argued that justice had not been served. Supporters of Lorena believed the verdict reflected the profound psychological impact of prolonged abuse. Legal scholars, advocates, and commentators continued debating the case for years. As time passed, the public perception of Lorena gradually evolved. For many years, she remained associated primarily with the shocking incident itself. However, she increasingly spoke about domestic violence awareness and the experiences of abuse survivors. Rather than retreat entirely from public life, she chose to use her visibility to address issues that she believed had been overlooked during the media frenzy surrounding her case. She later became involved in advocacy efforts focused on helping individuals affected by domestic violence. Through charitable and nonprofit work, she sought to provide support, resources, and education for survivors. Her efforts reflected a determination to transform a painful chapter of her life into something that might benefit others facing similar challenges. Advocates frequently point to the case as a reminder that domestic violence can involve far more than visible physical injuries. Emotional abuse, intimidation, coercive control, financial dependence, and psychological trauma often play significant roles. These factors can be difficult to recognize from the outside, making intervention and support especially challenging. The Bobbitt case also highlighted how immigration concerns can create additional vulnerabilities. Individuals who fear losing legal status, economic security, or community support may feel trapped in unhealthy or dangerous situations. Experts continue to emphasize the importance of ensuring that survivors have access to resources regardless of their immigration circumstances. Another lasting lesson involves the influence of media framing. The public often learns about major criminal cases through headlines, television segments, and social media discussions. The aspects of a story that receive the most attention can significantly shape public understanding. In the Bobbitt case, many observers later argued that sensational details received far more coverage than the allegations of abuse and the broader social issues surrounding the marriage. The timing of legal proceedings also affected public perception. Because different trials occurred separately and generated different narratives, audiences often formed opinions based on whichever information they encountered first. This phenomenon illustrates how public understanding can be shaped as much by presentation and timing as by the underlying facts themselves. Perhaps most significantly, the case contributed to wider conversations about marital rape and domestic violence. During the early 1990s, public discussion of these issues was far less developed than it is today. The intense attention surrounding the Bobbitt case forced many people to confront difficult questions about consent within marriage, the psychological effects of abuse, and the challenges survivors face when seeking justice. Even decades later, the case remains a subject of documentaries, legal analysis, academic research, and public debate. Different observers continue to interpret the events through different lenses. Some focus on criminal accountability. Others emphasize trauma and victimization. Still others examine the role of media sensationalism and cultural attitudes during that era. What is undeniable is that the story extends far beyond the shocking act that first captured headlines. It is a story about immigration, relationships, power, fear, trauma, public perception, and the complicated ways society responds to allegations of abuse. The lasting impact of the case can be seen in the conversations it continues to inspire. It challenged assumptions, exposed gaps in public understanding, and encouraged broader examination of domestic violence and survivor experiences. While many people remember the case because of its most sensational details, those details represent only a small part of a much larger and more complicated narrative. As the years have passed, one lesson has become increasingly clear. Headline-grabbing crimes rarely emerge from a vacuum. Behind dramatic events are often layers of personal history, social pressures, emotional struggles, and unresolved conflicts that cannot be captured in a single newspaper headline or television segment.